All right, this is. That's better. Good evening, everybody.
Good
Good
evening,
evening,
Father.
Father.
Good evening.
Good evening, Father.
Okay, so I have on the hour right now, in the name of the Father and of the Son and of the Holy Spirit. We are drawing to a close in this course. According to my calendar, you're wrapping up the material on Holy Confession and the Sacrament of Prayer Oil, anointing. And next week, we have no agenda because of American Thanksgiving. And then after that, we have the funeral and memorials for the dead. That's pretty beefy stuff. So don't, you're not done quite yet. All right. And I may not be looking at the most up-to-date syllabus. But in any event, we're drawing to a close. Let's get that out of my way. First, introductory note on the final grading of the midterm exam. I'm not done yet, but I don't know a couple of technical fixes for what I'm trying to do. So I've got somebody working on it. And as soon as they have that in hand, I will fix that and I will send you all a message fixing the grade, the grades for the midterm. The only agenda we have left then is the review of the material in the second half of the semester. And then I'm going to save out some of that for our last Zoom session that's going to be held on Thursday, December the 2nd. And then we can pick up the funerals and memorial service and any other questions regarding all this material. The reason why I put all this together like this, 2 Zooms, is this second half of the semester is covering a massive amount of material. As you can see, we've got the Sacrament of Holy Matrimony in one session, just one session for everything that has to do with that. One session for Imposition of Hands, and then a combined session for Confession and Prayer Oil, the therapeutic sacraments, and then a session for funeral memorials and a session on prayer, the ascesis of the believer. Well, it's a lot of material. And I wanted to give you a chance to discuss it. Generally speaking, let me just introduce what will be on the final. There'll be 50 questions as the midterm has. All of them except for 4 will be covering the second half of the semester. So 46 questions distributed as follows. A couple of questions on prayer as in terms of the ascesis. This is mostly, well, it's all coming from my lecture on prayer. So if you're careful about taking notes in my lecture, you should be prepared for that. 11 questions on matrimony. 12 questions on the mystery of imposition of hands, as well as the product of that sacrament, namely the ranks of the clergy. 5 questions on confession, the mystery of repentance or confession, and 6 questions on prayer oil. otherwise known as anointing. And then 9 questions on funeral and memorial services. So pretty much distributed throughout. I'm leaning heavily upon my lectures for these questions. I went over the exam because I know my exams are tough. So I'm editing it and making sure that everything's as clear as possible. If you're careful to listen to my lectures, and if you give care to the readings, especially the text of the services, in every case, I've given you readings from Hapgood along that, along the way there. You don't need to worry about Shmeman in the second half of the semester where there's a reading. You don't need to worry about Erickson, Challenge of Our Past. The recommended book, Mixed Marriages by Father Rober. You don't have to worry about that one. So I'm leaning heavily on the content of the services and their developmental aspects and their theological importance, the meaning of the sacraments that make up the sanctification of life. So I have a pretty concrete goal in the second half of the course. I'm going to give you one example.
Father O'Grady,
Yes. Who's talking?
will there be anything from Higher Monk Gregorios?
Yes. Gregorios is important. Yeah. 24.
Father Patrick, quick question, sorry. I know we have a lot of material. The readings are a lot of material on Hapgood, but I think that was a recommended text per the syllabus and not a required text. So are we going to still be held responsible for that when it comes to the final?
Yes, I heard the question. Let me, did I put it under recommend? I did. Okay. What about in the, let's see, what sacraments do I have in the select texts? I believe I have the sacraments, the sacrament of matrimony in there. If you go, if you're Antiochian and you go to your parish church, ask your priest to lend you his Hapgood book, service book. It's the classic service book in the Antiochian church. If you're not in the Antiochian archdiocese, still ask your priest. You might be surprised. A lot of the Russian priests and even Greek priests have it. So you might want to go and ask them. And basically you need the text of the service. Okay. I don't care about the critical finer points of the text, but I do care that you have an access to the services. Okay.
Perfect. Thank you.
All right. Okay.
Also, just to chime in, I'm going to put a link to the online. It is online, and I'm going to throw the link in the chat, Michael. So if you want to.
Hapgood's online.
Yeah, I'm going to put the link right now in the
I'm
chat.
not surprised. It's over
We already
100
did it.
years old.
Yeah, look
so
like it's already there. Yeah,
open
thank you.
source. Archive.org, by the way, is a great site for those texts. I should have thought to link it to that, but I'm an older guy, so I think of printed books first. I don't think of online books.
Gregorios
Right, right, right.
has that new Rome press if you need that one on marriage.
Okay, that's right. New Rome Press. Mhm. It's not a
Great.
long book, but it's theologically important.
Great little book too.
Yes. Okay, I'm going to give you a question because I'm interested in you knowing the kind of thing that means something to me that you're only going to learn in this course and you will find elsewhere. This has to do with the funeral. So the funeral service you're going to be reading up now, leading into the session of the December 2nd. You're either in it now, or you're about to be in it. So I think I've got an old syllabus in front of me here, so forgive me if I'm off just a little bit. It doesn't matter. So in the funeral service, I address the funeral like any sacrament. Now, some will argue it's not a sacrament because they have the scholastic 7 and it doesn't fit within, you can't shoehorn it into that 7. But we Orthodox don't care about that. Everything in the church is sacramental, and the scholastics have never been that important to us. So the funeral service is very important. It's very holy service, and its development over time is very complicated. Now, my lecture on that, when you get to, will bring out some of the details there. So I won't go through all that now. But there's a question in the exam, which I'll just give it to you. It's my Thanksgiving treat for you, okay? So the question runs like this. The following elements of the funeral service are considered to form the theological bedrock of the service. Good, okay. A, Psalm 90, Eulogitaria, Canon of Theophanes, Theophanes, the Kontakion with the saints, grant rest, O Lord, and the New Testament readings. B, Psalm 118, although abbreviated, Eulogitaria, Psalm 50, Kontakion, Stihira of St. John of Damascus, Memory Eternal, and the Troparia at the Last Kiss of Peace. Already your head's spinning. It's like, wait a minute, what? All of those are important, aren't they? Okay, and then the last one, which is, those would give you a clue to the last choice. There is no absolutely fixed formula. The funeral is subject to profound variation of elements, all of which, in whatever arrangement they are offered, provide an adequate funeral. There's our correct answer. So I'm giving you that because this particular aspect of our course, the looking at all the other sacraments besides those of initiation, we wind up having to do that in just a few weeks. So it is a very tall order. So let's do this tonight, since you've already been studying matrimony, ordination, confession, and the rest of it, as far as you've gone now. Let me propose a general subject like matrimony. We'll start there, and then let's discuss that as needed. What questions you might have, comments in the looking through the services, listening to the lecture, and so on. Then we'll move to ordination, and then we'll move to confession and so on. So before we go into any of those, do you have any general questions so far from my introduction here?
I have a question, Father O'Grady.
Yes.
On the final exam, the class grade will take into account both the examinations and the uploaded and the grade of the uploaded text that we did.
You mean the revised notes?
Yeah.
Well, the revised notes, you just finished that, right?
Right.
Okay, so you're done with the revised notes now. There's no more of those.
Right.
And I have not graded those yet, so I'll get to that. So I don't need to comment on those right now, do I?
No. What I'm asking, if the final grade will take into account the grades of the revised note or just the examination?
Oh,
Because
definitely. Yes, everything. Yes.
Okay.
So you have 3 revised notes assignments and 2 exams. The
Okay.
3 revised notes, all 3 of them add up to 40% of the grade for the course.
Okay. Great,
And then the two exams add up to 60%.
got
That
it,
is to say each exam is 30% of the grade.
got it. Thank you very much.
Very good. Any other questions of that nature?
Yeah, Father, the final exam, will it be the same logistical format as the midterm where we have
Yeah.
a week? We can
Yes,
print it off, we can review it and really try.
yes, indeed, you will. You will have a week.
Okay,
It will be published on Friday, December the 3rd. And you have to complete it by Friday, December the 10th.
okay. Thank you.
Okay.
And that's this year, not next year, the completion date?
Yeah, 2021. Okay.
Good try.
Any
though.
other
Good
smart Alex out there?
I'm not going to try to be a smart aleck. I just had a question on the example question.
Yes.
I would assume when I see a question like that, that I should find the exact wording of that last optional answer somewhere in your lectures or in a text. Otherwise, I would think the rest of them are somewhat subjective, and
That's
any
right.
one of them I might consider to be right. So is it true that you have quoted something in that last option?
Oh, yes,
Okay.
yes.
So I would be spending a lot of time trying to find that exact quote.
Yeah, you might not find the exact in those exact words, but as close as I can possibly make it, because I don't have an actual transcript of my lecture. I have notes. And so I'm checking to see that I've presented it, and I see that I have.
So if that answer wasn't there, one or more of the other ones might be chosen by someone who would say, yeah, I think this one is important.
But then it would be a subjective answer on their case,
Yeah.
because nowhere in my lecture do I give that list of items as being the core of the funeral service.
Okay.
Yeah.
I'm just pointing out what I struggled with was it seemed to me that several of the answers in many of the questions were factually correct, but I think sometimes you were looking for the better answer. And that made the test particularly hard for me.
I
I
understand.
don't know about anyone else.
I'm looking at that, and that is one question that one student brought up with me in private. It's like, it's clear that you had the best answer you wanted, but is it true that all the other answers are by the fact of their wording excluded? And I've tried to stick with that. How successfully I've been, I guess, remains further to be seen. So like I said, I'm working on that from the last one. And I'm also, I have been working on this final exam to ensure that as much as possible. So I know how frustrating that can be on your side. Yes, Subdeacon Stephen.
I thought I would chime in and do one of the smart aleck questions, but please forgive me. If for the sake of the extreme value of your time,
I can come and get you. I know where you live.
I love it. So I'm saying I'm being smart aleck, but for the sake of your valuable time and ours, I would love to get to the content if that's okay with you.
Bravo. All right. So let's start with matrimony. What questions do you have on the theme of matrimony? Why is it a sacrament? What relationship does matrimony have to the other sacraments, especially the divine liturgy. Let's start with a simple reflection.
So
that's a
blessed is the
question.
kingdom. Blessed is the kingdom, and then the cup.
Okay. Yes, you're pointing to the words at the crowning service, blessed is the kingdom, and the sharing of the common cup toward the end.
Right.
Okay. Those are specific elements in the crowning service, that half of the service of holy matrimony, that clearly related to the divine liturgy. I think my lecture brought that out. I attempted to really underscore that. But I'm going a little deeper with this question. So let me ask you this. A priest recently set a marriage ceremony to take place on Saturday afternoon. Next day is going to be the divine liturgy as usual. So I said to him, Father, I know him pretty well. I said, why are you doing a wedding on Saturday afternoon? And he said, is there a problem with that? And I said, yes, there is. You have it backwards. And he had never thought of the relationship of holy matrimony to the reception of Holy Communion, like to participation in the divine liturgy. So once we understand that the first element is the reception of Holy Communion in the divine liturgy, the couple comes, participates in the divine liturgy, receives Holy Communion on good preparation, then they advance to the next mystery, which is the crowning of their common life as husband and wife. That's theologically very significant. That's why we Orthodox have marriages only on certain allowed days, so that we don't violate that. It also explains why we do it on Sunday afternoon.
Father, I have
Yeah.
a question on that, because I've seen it quoted in one of the texts I read, not your text, but some other text. What if they don't receive communion before marriage? What's the implication of that?
Well, it's their marriage is an Orthodox marriage, of course, but it's this unlinking it in their mindset, this being unlinked to the divine liturgy. They think of the marriage as a solemnization, much like any marriage. They don't understand the unique vocation of an Orthodox marriage, how it depicts or portrays is a better word. It portrays the unity of Christ and his holy church, right? From Ephesians 5. And what better way to portray a thing than to actually live it with integrity? Now, part of it's not usually the married couple's fault, because they're young in many cases. They're not thinking like that. They're just looking forward to getting married. But it's up to the priest who's preparing them for holy matrimony to guide them into this spiritual path so they can see how it relates to that. It sacralizes the relationship, raises it to a whole new level in their conscious thinking, rather than just leaving it for them to figure out later on in life. Does that make sense?
So, Father, was there any time in history when the common cup was actually pre-sanctified?
Yes, I bring that out in my lecture. I'm sure I mentioned it.
Okay, so I wasn't imagining that. Okay.
No, it's for sure. And as a matter of fact, on our Department of Translations, we're working on the marriage service right now for our archdiocese. And we're finding all kinds of prayers and manuscript witnesses explaining how the chalice is on the altar and the couple comes right up close to the altar, and the priest gives them Holy Communion. It's the common cup of Holy Communion. So it's they received it in the liturgy, and they're receiving it again just before their marriage. It's a very unique thing. It went out of fashion about 1,000 years ago, but in Orthodox time, that's just a day. So it went out of fashion yesterday.
So my question,
Yes,
in the case of mixed marriages, where we have one person,
Right.
say a heterodox Christian, and one
Yeah.
person who is Orthodox. Obviously, the heterodox Christian is not going to receive communion, but that kind of leads me to this kind of the next obvious question. Is there at some point where the church says, absolutely not, you cannot marry that person because they are so far removed?
of course. So the issue of mixed marriage is a very difficult one. It started out with, what do we do with Christians who are not in communion with us, like Roman Catholics, that kind of thing. Nowadays, it tends to even take in people that are far from any, even they have no Catholic understanding of the church at all. They could be enthusiasts.
I was
But
thinking,
they were baptized and they're Protestant, and believe me, it leaves a lot of pastoral work for the priest to do in the years to come, especially when children come along, and then you want to baptize them, and then the one is saying, no, I'm going to wait for him to grow up and decide for himself what he wants.
well,
And he already made a pledge, I mean, it's difficult.
I was even thinking in this part of the country where I'm in Kentucky, and so we got some like way far removed, like
you got the snake handlers and stuff like that.
Yes, we do. Church
Yeah.
of God and Science.
I know all about it.
It's like baptized in Jesus' name, not in
No, in Jesus' name.
Jesus. Yeah, thank you. Sorry.
So, without putting too fine a point on it, the issue, if the church had continued to give communion in the common cup part, that's right at the very end, right before the procession and the end of the service. If that had still been communion, there'd be no possibility of mixed marriages. So once the communion in the wedding service ceased, and it became just a ceremony, like symbolizing their union in Christ, then since it wasn't sacramental, it opened the door to other people coming in. I mean, that were nominally Christian in some way, but not Orthodox. All right, so I understand that's difficult. I did not cover what I'm about to say, but I'll say it anyway. In the lead up to the second marriage, there is a service of second marriage. I don't know if you know that. I think I mentioned it, but I don't think I went into the details. And it's not on the test, so peace be to all. But in the second, there's two quotations given, one from a patriarch who said there is no second crowning. The church crowns once, that's it. And I think that was in the 9th or 10th century. Then a few centuries later, another one said, we only recognize one crowning, but we will do a second or a third one by economy. My dates are wrong. The first one has to be quite early because it was the issue of, I think, Leo IV, the emperor, who wanted to get married a fourth time, and the church had to say, no, your wives keep dying on you. This is a sign that you're not the healthiest guy to be married to, and in any event, that's too many marriages.
So even in the case of when someone gets widowed.
That's correct.
Okay.
That's correct.
Cool.
We're not talking about divorce, because that's a grave crime in the church, and that takes you out of communion. You have to be restored to Holy Communion in that case. The death of the wife or the husband, and then the general, if you will, the general ascetic expectation that those who have been married, assuming years of marriage, not, like the case where a young couple gets married and the one dies suddenly or is killed or whatever, then obviously you have to get married again because you have babies and that kind of thing. I'm talking about, after a long time. There's the second wedding is a condescension to the person's weakness. So it's pastorally indicated, and it picks up their life from there. We don't use the second marriage service unless both people have been married before. If the one has been married before, but the other has never been married, we don't use it because it's briefer and it's more penitential. You don't need this information for your final exam, just, I'll say en passant, okay? Okay, relationship to the liturgy,
Father,
yes?
one thing, I get the part about,
Yes,
how
Lyle,
they used to,
okay.
how they used to always do the, at the liturgy, and that's wonderful. Now, in the afternoons, when you're talking about the crowning, do they do both the betrothal and the crowning together now in a modern marriage?
Yes, so
Yeah.
it's not the bishops will not allow these to be separated anymore as they once were in antiquity. The betrothal service, which equals our modern engagement, only when a couple says they're engaged and they get rings, if they break the engagement, it's not considered, I mean, it's not good. It's sad, but they're not penalized in any way. Whereas in the church, a betrothal is a formal agreement. It is a formal agreement that marriage will take place, and that if a betrothal is broken, it's a serious matter, because most marriages are in antiquity and well into modern times were arranged between families. And so that means family arrangements were put into force, dowries and all that kind of stuff. And the new household was established. So we have cheapened marriage so much, we don't feel any of this anymore. It's just, but don't get me started on the social dimension.
But the betrothal ceremony is part of the crowning together, or do we just look at it? Do we just say that, no, the wedding is the crowning ceremony, or are we saying, no, this wedding is both the betrothal and the crowning ceremony together?
This is a very good question, Lyle. It strikes at the very root of the content of this, and you should be well aware of it. The betrothal service as such is not marriage. It is a preparatory service that sets the stage for the marriage to happen. And we don't separate them anymore. We immediately go from the betrothal to the crowning. That's why in many of the marriage texts, the words "blessed is the kingdom" are missing at the beginning of the crowning service, because in the consciousness of the priest doing it and the people experiencing it, they're not aware that it's two ceremonies anymore.
Right.
As a matter of fact, to make this point very, very clear, let me ask you this question. When you imagine a marriage taking place in your church, or if you're the priest doing it, or how your priest does it, which of the two that I'm going to say to you, which of the two do you see? So there's music or people singing or something. After everybody's come in and the cue has been given, there's a procession with the wedding party is come in. And then the bride, here comes the bride, right? Maybe they're not singing that, but it's the formal entrance of the bride. And she comes all the way up to the front where the priest and the groom and the wedding party are all waiting. The bride takes her place, leaving her father behind, or whoever walked her in lieu of her father. And then the bride and the groom are standing next to each other, and the priest starts right there in the center of the church on the solea, the betrothal service, exchange of rings, and then the censing, and then the crowning service. The whole thing takes place right there. There's one scenario.
Okay.
Now I'm just curious how widespread that would be. So raise your hand if that's what you're used to. I could tell the old guys all start raising their hands. The young guys are actually putting them on the screen. Okay, that's what you're used to. Okay, the other one is where you have the betrothal service, which takes place in the back of the church, in the narthex, or in the entry, the first part of the nave, or in some churches right in the middle of the nave. And there's no formal procession at that point. The bride and the groom and the wedding party are simply there in the nave, and the priest comes out, hands them both tapers, and starts the betrothal service. Then, after the exchange of rings is complete, he takes a censer, starts censing, and they actually make the procession from the nave up to the solea, where they take their stand in front of the little table on which the gospel and the crowns and all the wedding appurtenances are. So it's clear that there's two services going on with a procession linking them. How many are used to seeing that? Okay.
I've seen in the Russian tradition,
Yeah.
we actually have a combination of the both, but about 99% of the time, the betrothal is in the narthex or in the back of the church.
Very good. That's how I do it. That's the classic way to do it. A betrothal is a betrothal. It's not the sacrament. It's simply the promise that is made, and the rings symbolize the promise and the commitment. Okay.
Beautiful.
Then the crowning, which is the actual sacrament per se, that takes place right in front of the table, which is set up in front of the church before the altar. Okay.
I like that better.
Yeah, so do I.
Well, it's just the idea of like back in the narthex, the betrothal type ceremony, and then coming up, it's just more theologically sound and more tying it, I think, into the church. And then the pageantry of the other way with the "Here Comes the Bride" type thing, I think tends to detract from that.
Well, and it also is a cultural assimilation. It means that we've kind of like shoehorned our Orthodox tradition into a form that's culturally recognizable to the people. I mean, I'm speaking as a pastor now. If I have the bride's mother coming to me and saying, "Father, I understand that you're not going to have the 'Here Comes the Bride' part. That's like what I want. And you're just going to do this thing out in the nave, and then where's my 'Here Comes the Bride' and my little sweetie darling girl? I don't want to take all those pictures of her coming down in the big wedding dress." So there are human dimensions of this that are quite palpable. So I look for answers that help people where they are, but I also theologically train them. I want them to know what they're doing. Yes, Subdeacon Stephen.
Yes, and forgive me for this, but if we have any fellow students who aren't married yet, Father Alvin West, who you know very well, Father Patrick, when
Sure.
Jen and I were to be wed, we asked him, what is the way to do this according to our tradition, regardless of what we and our families might want? And he outlined it. We got married the way you said, but as the years go by, if anyone is to be wed here, we're very thankful that he pastored us in that way and made sure we understood that, because it's been much more meaningful, I think, when we reflect
Awesome.
on it.
That's beautiful. Thank you for sharing that.
Yeah.
Okay, and then what's the relationship of marriage to the law of nature? This is a big item. I did not go into it much in my lecture, but it should not be ignored, because marriage is rooted in creation itself, but it lifts us up from the level of just he made them male and female, right? Those words our Lord repeated in the gospel. "For this reason, a man shall leave his father and mother and cleave to his wife." The word cleave means to embrace. It has a very strong bodily contact, connotation, if there's a sexual union of the two in marriage. So this is a very unique sacrament among all of them because it's depicting the kingdom to come, right? As St. Paul says in Ephesians 5, and as we see in the Johannine reading, the gospel reading, chapter 2, the wedding in Cana of Galilee. But it also is rooted in the law of nature. So be aware of that. There is an issue in my lecture on marriage regarding the ancient tradition of it. We have far more prayers in the marriage service now than they did in even as late as the 8th century. So please go back and look at your notes from my lecture and refresh your memory on that. The Barberini manuscript, which I mentioned in my lecture, shows only 3 prayers for the wedding. Typical of the ancient Ephilogia or the priest's prayer book, they're very brief, and they presume that the priest by oral tradition knows how to do the service. So you don't have detailed rubrics in the old manuscripts, but you just have the content of the prayers, which the priest would need. So be aware of the development of the service. That's what we do in liturgical theology. We're aware of the development of the liturgical forms, the ordo of the sacraments. And so now, anything else on marriage before we move on to ordination? Okay, yes, Scott?
Well, since we're touching on both, I'm not sure if Schmemann meant this, but in his chapter on love, he actually puts marriage and ordination to the priesthood in the same chapter under love. It is what kind of tie-in besides love is there between marriage and ordination?
I think that's just a juxtaposition on his part. He's not here to answer this question. I don't see any particular unifying element between them, other than that marriage is a sacrament rooted in nature, whereas ordination is rooted only in, not in nature, but in the apostolic ministry. It is the sacrament of the apostolic succession in one form or another from the Acts of the Apostles. It's the one sacrament that priests cannot perform. It has to come from the apostolic successor himself, that is the territorial bishop, the bishop in charge. Ordinations belong to him by right of his archpastoral staff over the local church of which he's the presiding minister, and his successors. Even auxiliary bishops don't ordain without the approval of the territorial bishop or the presiding bishop of a given local church. So now when we're considering ordination, we have to consider 2 things. We have to consider the mystery or the sacramental details of it per se, but we also have to consider what it produces. And my lecture touches on both of those. That is, it produces bishops, priests, and deacons. And so we have to at least have something in our minds to say about those things. So I'll expect you to know the difference between ordained clergy and non-ordained clergy. What in the West they call the major orders and the minor orders. What in our Eastern or Greek form of Christianity we call the apostolic ministers and everyone, and then everyone else. You could, for example, you can look at the product of ordination, and you can see that those who are becoming ordained, they are ordained by rank So the mystery celebrated once per rank, just like a degree, if you will. So we make a deacon only once. We don't make him again, ever. Even if he goes halfway around the world to serve somewhere else, he's already a deacon. We don't make him a deacon again. So if ordination takes place again, it's to an advanced rank above that, a presbyter, and then beyond that, bishop. Now we have in English the habit of saying we ordain deacons and priests, and then we say we consecrate bishops, but really it's the same word for all three. And if you look carefully at the ordination service, you'll find this in the Hapgood service book. I said this in my lecture, so I'm underscoring its importance here. The actual words that make the person into the rank that he's being ordained, deacon, presbyter, or bishop, are the same words no matter what rank. If we just fill in the name of the rank different. The bishop lays his hands upon the head of the candidate there at the holy table. And he says, I'm going by memory, the servant of God, the pious subdeacon X, is now made a deacon. It's just performative language, straightforward. And the sacramental aspect is given to the deacon in the form of vestments. And the diaconal vestments with the orarium and all the rest are granted to him, and he's vested right then after he's made a deacon. Same form happens for the presbyter. He comes to the altar as a deacon and leaves it as a presbyter. And then the same thing for a presbyter or a deacon, by the way. You can be ordained a bishop right from the diaconate. There's in the tradition, even catechumens were elected to the episcopate and had to be quickly brought up to the ranks. Ambrose of Milan is an example. He was a Orthodox layman and an imperial official. He was a governor of that area. And he was elected to the episcopate. And so he had to be made all those ranks before he could be ordained a bishop. Tarasios of Constantinople, same story. We have, in the tradition, we have this. I'm only underscoring the performative language of the sacrament, which is the same wording for any rank. It's just that the name of the rank is given at the for the one needed. And that when a bishop is ordained, it takes at least 2 or 3 bishops to do that service. It cannot be done by one bishop alone. This goes back to the canons of the early ecumenical synods. All right. I'm not asking you to know all the canons, obviously. That's a massive amount of material. Once again, I'm really, really asking you to depend upon my lectures and the notes that you got from that. And then the service of ordination as you see it in Hapgood.
Father, can I follow up just briefly on the last question
Yes,
about marriage and ordination?
Right.
Is there anything to be read into the fact that the hymns that are read as the couple circle the table are the same, although I think in slightly different order, as the hymns that are sung as the ordinand is led around the altar?
Yes, of course. Yes, they are. Because the fact of the matter is that the newly ordained is now married to the altar. And that language is used in our tradition. Indeed, our Metropolitan Archbishop, Joseph, when he asked my wife whether she would approve for me being ordained, and now you have to know my wife's sense of humor. They had a little go round about that, but he made clear that your husband now will have the altar also as his priority in his life, and it changes your marriage relationship in a little way. Actually, it's a significant way. she's still my wife, but she bows before the demands of the pastoral burden that's laid on me by dint of the ordination, right? That's not something I can walk away from. And everybody who aspires to holy ordination needs to make sure that they bring their wife along with them so that she understands that she's sharing him. That's why in our tradition, the wives actually have, they as a title, a ceremonial title, they have the feminine form of that order of ministry given as a title. So you have in Arabic, for example, Shemasa, which is the feminine form of Shemas, which is deacon, or Huriya, which is from the late Arabic, really from French, the word for a priest, from the time of the Crusades. But there's more, Justin. And this might be where Schmeemann's link, I don't know who asked that question earlier. This might be what, okay, yes, Scott. This might be what he was doing, and I have to go back and read that. But so let me put it to you this way. I've had people ask me, especially catechumens or inquirers, so can priests be married? And I said, well, let me answer the question by being as precise as I can. Priests cannot marry, but married men can become priests. That takes a little digesting to get in. It's the same thing for the deacon. Deacons cannot marry, but married men can become deacons. And then they start thinking, oh, you mean you have a wife you've had since before you were a priest? And I said, now you understand. And that doesn't change. But if my wife dies, I may not marry another.
Thank you, Father. That was really helpful.
Very good. Okay.
Father?
Yeah.
Sorry for interruption.
Yes,
So,
Joe.
My grandmother, she's the wife of a priest and a daughter of a priest. So she's kind of always giving me a lot of advice when it comes to priesthood. So she told me kind of a definition of why, I'm not sure it's right or wrong, why a priest cannot be married. Because when you become a priest, all church is your children. You cannot marry to your children. So that's the one definition that she gave me.
Yes.
And the question that I have is, I've been told, I'm not sure is it true, as per canon, widowed priest can be a bishop, ordained to be a bishop.
Are you talking about a married priest?
Yeah, once he become widowed, like he can be later on his life.
Oh,
can he be ordained as a bishop?
Of course.
Right?
Yes, because this is strictly on the level of economy. All of you that are married, you know how the demands of family are for you. We must pay attention to the care of our wives. We cannot ignore them. We have to give them attention, love. We think about them all the time, and we think about how to care for them and our children. But a bishop's life as an apostolic successor is completely consumed with the care of the church. So the church learned early on, not by canonical prohibition. St. Peter the Apostle was married. So were many of the early bishops, not most, but many of them were married. And it only became clear over time that it was impractical for the archpastors of a local church to be married. It was impractical. And so you might say the economic arrangement of having our bishops taken from the monasteries or from the ranks of venerable clergymen who have proven themselves and no longer had families to care for because their wives have passed on. Or in the case, to put it bluntly, where the husband and the wife parted, not divorcing, but parted each to go to a monastery, and then the man was taken to be a bishop. That has happened too in our tradition. Anyway, you can see it's a complicated affair. So that means you have to pay attention to what the product is. So what is a bishop really? And what did I cover in the lectures regarding that? We need to know what synodality and primacy is in the Orthodox Church. It's very important that we understand that both terms are important to us, that the bishops rule by synod, but there's also one of them that's actually the primate of a synod of bishops that speaks for the synod as the presiding bishop. Both of these have functions in our tradition, and you should know something about that. Cyprian of Carthage has a famous saying in Latin. It's episcopatum solidum est. I think I mentioned it in my lecture. That is to say, the episcopate is one. It's a block. It's a solid block because it's Christ's own ministry. That means that the bishops, by their very act of being bishop, share in something that transcends each and every one of them as persons. Because we have basically one bishop and pastor of our souls, Jesus Christ. This is what St. Peter said, right? So that the bishop is the icon, the personal icon of the tradition, and is in persona Christi. We look at the bishop, as St. Ignatius of Antioch said, where the bishop is present, so are all the people, when Christ, just as Christ is present in the church. I think I mentioned that also in my lecture, if I'm not mistaken. Okay, so that's holy ordination.
So, Father?
Yeah.
For subdeacons, I've heard that that's an ordination, but since they don't go to the altar or anything like that, that's more of a tonsure instead of an ordination. Would that be correct thinking, or?
Yeah, we don't call it a tonsure. We call it a, what I mentioned in my lecture, the distinction between hierotonia and hierothesia. Hierotonia, the imposition of hands, makes deacons, presbyters, and bishops, and that's done at the holy table.
Right.
The hierothesia, or the simple placing of a hand, is done outside of the altar in the nave of the church, and out of that we can say a man is installed or set apart, I think is the best word, set apart to be a reader or a subdeacon. Those are the two minor orders that are the most common in our Antiochian tradition to make. But some churches actually will make chanters or catechists out of these minor orders as well. So it depends on the local church. And they may get married. So if you have a reader, he can get married because he's not an apostolic minister. He's in other words, everyone that's received the placement of a hand of a bishop for a certain function in the church, whether to help at the altar as a subdeacon or to read the apostle book and the Psalms, out in the nave from the chanter stand, all of them are when they're married as laymen. They're not the word clergy used to embrace all of that, but now we tend not to use it, that word klerikos, and in Greek it's related to the part of the nave where all the chanters and the readers are. We still call it the kleros, so the clergy are the people that stand in the kleros, right?
Okay. Now, Hapgood also has right before reader the installation of a taper bearer. Was that the candle lighter?
Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
We in our Antiochian tradition, we combine those two. All readers are by definition, they're same with subdeacons. They have a responsibility of taking care of the lighting of the church. So that means that those who are receiving the placement of hands to be a reader or subdeacon, this takes place outside of the altar. All right. And I would say one of the outcomes from this establishment of apostolic orders in the church means that we have one presiding minister at all times in the church, just one. We Orthodox love concelebrations. So we have the liturgy. If there's other priests, we invite them to come into the altar and stand with us. This is a beautiful tradition we have, but still there's only one protos, one first, one president, to use the ancient language of Justin. In Greek, proistomenos, somebody who stands in front. Even in a concelebration, we don't have several priests serving. We have one priest serving, and the other ones are simply helping him do that. That's why we tend to have a rather formal way of sharing out the parts of the liturgy to concelebrants. This holds for bishops when there's more than one bishop as well. And when the archbishop or the bishop is serving and the priests are around him, like a hierarchical liturgy, the bishop will look at one priest or another, and it'll be their turn to say whatever is next. He could do that to anyone. But as I said, there tends to be good manners in this. We like doing things in order, and so we find it to be the case. But only one president. Are we ready to move on to confession? Or is there any other questions on this one? All right, let's move on to the sacrament of confession or repentance. The main thing I'd like to make a point here is that we really only have a very loose form for this sacrament. It differs very greatly from one priest to another. Even in my church, I have an associate priest. When he does, when he hears someone's confession, he does it in a much more formal way than I do. I mean, very informal. I usually put my epitrachelion on over my head after blessing it. I sit with the person for a little bit and listen to them, ask questions to make sure I'm up to date with them. And then when we get closer to the actual confession part, they're ready. Then we stand in front of the cross. And I give them I have something written on like a simple prayer. I give that to them, starting with the words, I have sinned, O Lord, and to thee do I confess, to Our Lady the Theotokos, to all the saints, and to you, my spiritual father, all my sins. So I give them a little form to follow. It's very, very simple. So this sacrament does not have a hard liturgical form, if you will. We've received certain prayers from the tradition. From one local church to another, it has different practices, more or less agreeing, of course, on the core of the sacrament, which is the priest saying the words of absolution with a blessing over the head of the penitent after the confession is complete. So don't spend a lot of time studying it to look for a form. You'll find it in Hapgood, but there you see it in a form no one does. I can tell you this for sure. It's way too lengthy. it does not suit modern conditions at all, as most people are trying to shoehorn a confession into their busy life, and the priests usually don't have the time for all that either. It is also important to underscore that confession has no direct relationship to the reception of Holy Communion, except in the case of serious sins. I don't know if I made this point sufficiently clear in my lecture, but I'll make it here. Frequency of confession is really a matter between the confessor and the individual penitent. Some people need very frequent confession because they're very weak and they have they need a lot of support. Other people, they have a good rhythm in their life and they need to come once in a while in order to, you might say, sharpen up their conscience. The absolute minimum required by our church is confession during Great Lent in anticipation of Paschal Communion, or communion during the Paschal Mystery. That is well grounded in our tradition, because basically what we're doing is behaving like catechumens at that time. We're really taking stock of our life. We're working on purification. As St. John says, those who have this hope in them are purifying themselves, right? Confession is an act of purification. But I have had a lot of people come to me over time saying, what do I confess? And I said, I don't know. If your conscience doesn't bother you, you don't need to worry about it. Well, in Lent, what do I confess? Well, if you're only coming once a year to confession, then you're not used to confessing. And that's a different kind of problem. You have a kind of a spiritual paralysis and you don't know yourself very well. Those who know themselves find no shortage of things to confess in their life. And so this is a pastorally sensitive sacrament. It requires lots of work for people in order to bring them into the right spirit of it. In the early church, open public confession was indicated for the most serious of sins. Now, when those sins are confessed, the priest is duty bound before God to weigh carefully the grave nature of whatever has been confessed and either refer it to the bishop in cases of very serious matters like divorce, adultery, apostasy, or some sins that are actually crimes according to the society, like felonies of one kind or another. These kind of matters mean that the person can't take communion because their conscience has been injured in a very grave way, and they need to have some kind of a penance to help them recover their sanity spiritually before they can approach the Holy Mysteries again. I didn't go into that so much in my lectures because that's kind of going into pastoral theology, and it's going into like the sacred canons themselves, the disciplinary canons of the church. So I'm not expecting you to know all that stuff, but you should know about absolution as being the core of the sacrament, that there are certain conditions that are imperative on the penitent in order for confession to be effective or valid. I mentioned those in my lecture. Just taking a quick look at my notes to see if I've covered everything. Generally speaking, what is confession? It has many meanings in the Bible, and I will confess thee, O Lord, and praise thy name forever. In that sense, confession means to give thanks. Then the other Psalm, I believe it's Psalm 31, where he says, I know I will confess my sins and I will make known mine iniquity. And that actually, I believe it's Psalm 31. That particular one has to do with the sacrament of confession. I was saying out loud what I did. Confession is also an admission of faith. Like I confess my faith. I believe in one God, Father Almighty, right? So the word exomologisis in Greek, or confession, that's the Latin equivalent of it, is the opening of one's mouth to God and speaking the truth. We say to God what things are true about him. We say to God what things are true about us. There's the confession of sins, right? And generally speaking, it's interchangeable with the word thanksgiving in the Psalms. I will confess to thee, O Lord, meaning I will give thanks to thee. I'm not sure how much I went into that in my lecture, but it's important information. Okay. Anything else on confession? All right, well, let's move on to prayer oil. I do have 6 questions on prayer oil, evangelion. I'm translating the name of the sacrament as it comes to us in the tradition. We tend in English to stick with the mechanical name of the sacrament, anointing, rather than the substance of it, the material. The prayer oil is oil that's infused with prayer, much like you put a tea bag into hot water and the hot water infuses, the tea infuses the hot water. There's a mutual exchange. So we have prayer, we have oil set out, the priests pray, and those prayers are piling up around that oil, and the oil is infused with the prayer of the priests, and it becomes holy. So we call it prayer oil. Now, that's the name of the sacrament. Anointing only refers to the act of imposing that oil on the sick to anoint them with it, right? And this comes from James chapter 5. That's the clearest scripture. Is anyone sick among you? Let him call for the presbyters of the church, and they will anoint him. And they'll pray for him, anoint him with oil. If you have any, he'll be healed. And if you have any sins, they will be forgiven, right? That's the minimum epistle reading in that sacrament, by the way. I believe I did talk in my lecture about this sacrament, that it's in its latest form over the long period of development. It was its full form in the Hapgood service book, or in any, if you have the little book on the sacrament of prayer oil or anointing that we use on Holy Wednesday evening in Holy Week, which is just simply the sacrament itself. It's not a Holy Week service. Then you'll see 7 sets of readings and 7 priestly prayers. That presumes that there are 7 priests concelebrating the sacrament, right? As James 5 says, call for the presbyters, plural, of the church. It's not easy to get 7 priests together. So that sacrament is, it can be abbreviated, it can be shortened, depending on how many priests are present. I have a form of it for 3 priests that I've worked out with Metropolitan Joseph's blessing. We had occasion to have 3 priests celebrate this sacrament at certain times of the year for the sick, and it was very effective. If 1 priest celebrates it, it can be abbreviated very, very greatly, and the sacrament can be used more frequently than it is. I would suspect most of you only see it once a year on Holy Wednesday. I mean, I'm curious, does anyone see this sacrament celebrated any more than that? It's a shame, really, because this is a beautiful sacrament for the healing of soul and body, and it should be celebrated more frequently.
Would that be the same as being anointed with oil?
No,
You-
not the same. Many times priests, because they look at how long it would take to celebrate the sacrament, and they find it impractical, so they don't do it. Instead, they take some oil, blessed oil to be sure, maybe even from the crypt of a saint. Like in my area out here in the West, we have bottles of oil from the shrine of Saint John of Shanghai and San Francisco that circulate widespread. And I even have one in my car, like if I'm visiting somebody in the hospital, I'll use it. But why not actually, if somebody's very sick and very ill and bringing everybody else together, celebrate the sacrament in an abbreviated way? If there's just the one priest, you can skip most of the orthros part of the sacrament and pray the sacrament, the core of it, like one set of readings and one priestly prayer, 1, 2, or 3 of them. You know, this is certainly fine. It doesn't take that long, and it's very beautiful. I did it one time, maybe 3 years ago in December, because someone very near and dear in our parish was very ill, had a very rare disease, and it was lethal. So she asked for the sacrament, and I said yes. I published it in my parish, and many people came. And of course, we don't do anything privately in the church. I said, if you're sick, you're welcome to be anointed with the oil. And 3 or 4 people bore witness that they were cured of their problem. And the woman that had asked, she did go to have surgery, but her cancer was arrested, and the surgery was effective. And so the combination of the good medical arts on the one hand and the prayer of the church was a winning combination. Now, some people don't recover from their grievous illnesses, but they gain very great spiritual gifts from the experience. So, and basically you're hearing my commercial that this sacrament should be celebrated more often than it is.
Is this also called Holy Unction? Is it
Yes.
the same service?
Yes.
Father, I have 2 questions, actually, if I may.
Yes, Subdeacon.
Thank you. I seem to remember reading about blessed oil in the church. In Arabic, we call mayroom.
Okay. Yeah, miron.
And I wonder if that's prepared using different liturgical service.
Yes. The Arabic word is actually the Greek miron. And holy miron is chrism. This is not the same as the oil of anointing for the sick. As a matter of fact, when someone's sick, we never use miron for them. Miron has one purpose only, and that is to seal newly baptized Christians with the gift of the Holy Spirit. It's apostolic oil. And so we have to make a clear distinction between the oils here. The oil that's consecrated in the sacrament of unction or anointing or prayer oil is sacramental oil, but it's not to initiate Christians. It's a different purpose. And it also can't be confused with the baptismal oil that we bless just before we anoint somebody about to be baptized. That's yet another oil.
I see. I see. Yeah. Thank you very much.
Sure.
One more observation. I think in your notes, in the service you have after the orthros form, you have the blessed is the kingdom.
Yeah.
But I looked for it in Hapgood and I did not see it.
That's
could be
right.
Oh, okay.
This is the same issue as we saw in marriage. So you have 2 services in marriage. You have the betrothal, and then you have the sacrament itself. And to start the sacrament itself, you should have blessed is the kingdom, and then you have the great litany, right?
Yeah.
The same thing is true in prayer oil. You have the orthros part. You should have blessed is the kingdom, and then you have that great litany. So you have the same structure, but because these things were mushed together, they were forgotten. and the sacramental nature of the core of that sacrament, it was lost, and it was felt like, oh, there's just all this stuff that has to be done. The whole thing together is the sacrament. And that's one of the things that taking a course like this can help, because you can start seeing what the elements really are. And that helps a very great deal in a good pastoral judgment, you know, and when you're participating in these things.
Actually, I have one more question, if I could, I think in the Roman Catholic services, they actually anoint the priest with oil during their consecration, or did I get that part wrong?
That I don't know. I believe that it's maybe, I'm going to guess here. I can't say I know this for sure, so don't go by it. You'd have to research it. My guess is that it's something similar to the anointing that the priests in the Old Testament received when they were made priests. You know, there's the three basic functions. There's king, prophet, and priest, right? And all of them are initiated by anointings of one kind or another.
Right.
But this, in our Christian consciousness, this is a problem, because when a Christian is made, there is that person is actually ordained to the status of lay person, and they share in the priesthood that Christians have in common. That's why St. Peter says a sacred priesthood, a holy nation, right? Not in the Protestant sense, but in the sense that they're competent to pray in the holy place, like the ancient sons of Aaron of old, right? So there's no need to anoint the apostolic ministers, because their role is very unique. It's a pastoral role.
I see.
This comes from a confusion of what a priest is in the sacral, like ancient, like the offering of sacrifices, the mediation between God and the people, that kind of thing. And the New Testament ministers, the New Testament priests, which have a distinctly sacramental function in behalf of the whole people of God. That's why I had you look at St. Maximus the Confessor at the end of the last course, because he introduces that concept very profoundly.
Okay. Thank you very much.
All right.
Father.
So, yes.
Anointing the sick, for in the case of a priest and an ordinary person, is there any difference? Because because I have attended a service for a priest. He was hospitalized towards his last time. So it was a long service with the bishop and we deacons and all the priests in the church. We all attended the service, and during the service, we know that the oil we've been blessed and by the priest. By the bishop. So by the bishop, and the candles were lit, and it was in a particular way. But I haven't seen that for an ordinary person done in the church. So most of the time when they do it for the priest, a bishop is present. And I've been told this oil is collected later for anointing the sick for ordinary people. Is that true?
Yes, it can be true, but I'm not, just two elements from your question.
It could be wrong, because I'm coming from the Syriac Orthodox tradition. It could be wrong.
But I'll just pick on two of them. First of all, the oil that comes from that is sacramental oil, and it's not to be distributed to any but to Orthodox Christians. You have to be an Orthodox Christian to receive that oil.
Yes.
All right. There was a problem years ago in our archdiocese where people would take cotton swabs, anoint people with the prayer oil, and then send it home with them to put on anyone. This is not correct, and it got corrected. The Metropolitan Philip corrected it. He was our former primate before our current one, and but many people say, well, what's the big deal? And part of the teaching that came out of this is, look, this is sacrament of the church. You have to be Orthodox. So I think what you were experiencing is just a more ceremonially rich or more solemn service of the sacrament, because there certainly would not be any distinction between priest and layman or laywoman or anyone in the celebration of this mystery, because it's for healing of soul and body, is irrespective of whether the person's ordained or not.
Okay, that's correct. Yes.
Yeah.
Usually it happens. I mean, we call it a name. We call it called the candila, the service of candila, and it's more ceremonial. Usually done for bishops and priests.
Yeah.
In those service, all the priests and bishops of these particular dioceses will be present there.
Okay.
And, yeah.
Okay. All right. Any other questions on prayer oil? Because we won't go any further tonight. I'm going to save the conversation on what remains for our next Zoom session on December 2nd, which is no small amount of material, because it's the funeral and the memorial. So that's all really important stuff. So you may have more questions that come up over these things when you're studying them. You can bring them up on December 2nd, or is it December 2nd? I keep saying that. Yes, December 2nd. You can bring them back to me then, and we'll be glad to discuss them. Is there any other questions to wrap us up for tonight? Because I want to honor the 90-minute session time that I marked out for this. I think we're just about there. All right. Look, God keep you. I wish all of you that are in the United States a blessed Thanksgiving time with your family. Take a break from your studies for a few days. Pour yourself into your family, your extended family, the people that are around you that join you at the table. Then hit it hard for those last few weeks to wrap up the semester when we come back together. And yes, how sweet to see your beautiful face, Jen. So somebody just joined one of the screens, and yes, hello. So blessed Thanksgiving to all of you, and we will reconvene in a couple of weeks, a few weeks, 3 weeks, maybe, whatever it is. Yeah. Any other last question? 2 weeks. Any
Thank
last?
you, Father Grady. Appreciate it.
God bless you.
Thank you, Father.
Thank
you,
Father.
Bye, Father Patrick.
Goodbye.
And you have a
Happy Thanksgiving, Father.
Thank you, Father.
Thank
Thank
you.
you, Father.
Happy Thanksgiving.
Thank
Happy
you.
Thanksgiving.